Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Rich Powell, the Executive Director at ClearPath, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this event at SEM 12, Nice Future. We're going to be today launching the Flexible Nuclear Campaign for Nuclear-Renewables Integration, the next stage of work in the Nice Future initiative. I'm joined by an incredible collection, very global perspectives of policymakers, business leaders, analysts, and advocates, all focused on finding a path together to flexible, affordable, reliable, very low carbon energy systems. And we're going to be exploring the role that flexible nuclear can play alongside renewables in setting up those systems. And with that, we are particularly lucky to have our conversation kicked off by Maria Korsnick. Maria Korsnick is a good friend. She's the President and Chief Executive Officer at the Nuclear Energy Institute here in the United States and one of the leading global advocates on nuclear energy and a transition to ever more advanced nuclear energy. Maria, over to you.
Greetings. Although we cannot be together in person this year, I'm encouraged that we're meeting to discuss the real path forward to addressing the climate crisis, the integration of nuclear with wind, solar, and other renewables. There's no bigger opportunity in front of us than rebuilding the world's energy system around carbon-free sources. Our ambitious climate commitments demand a reimagined energy system with our largest, most reliable carbon-free source at its center. Governments, NGOs, and the private sector all agree. Ambitious climate plans only work with nuclear energy. To meet the challenge before us, we need to preserve existing nuclear reactors and move the next generation of nuclear rapidly from design to demonstration to build. Technologies such as small modular reactors, microreactors, and other advanced designs will make nuclear even more efficient, even more affordable, and even more versatile. These reactors will come in different sizes and designs. They'll be able to change their output, pairing perfectly with more variable sources, such as wind and solar. And we know this transition can be good for the economy and for jobs. It will require us to focus on what has historically worked well for our energy system and apply those elements to the new carbon-free era. One way to achieve this is by encouraging policies that support a transition from coal to nuclear in circumstances where coal plants have announced their closures. We understand the pain that plant closures cause, whether they're nuclear or some other source. Investing in nuclear energy targeted in countries and communities that have long relied on fossil fuels can not only avert job losses, but take advantage of existing talent from the fossil fuel industry. The nuclear reactors of the future will have a tremendous role in making the transition affordable and smooth without compromising a steady flow of 24/7, 365 energy. Small modular reactors and other advanced reactors can take advantage of the land, grid interconnection, and cooling water available at coal plants. Some reactor technologies offer the potential to marry up directly with the steam systems at the newer coal plants, reducing the cost of construction potentially by 25% or more. At the end of the day, climate change is a global threat, and it will take flexible solutions that ensure energy security and economic benefits for every country to address it. Today's discussion on the Flexible Nuclear Campaign for Nuclear-Renewables Integration is important to help expand the understanding of how nuclear energy can partner with wind, solar, and other non-emitting technologies or replace retiring fossil fuel facilities to achieve our net zero carbon goals. I'm looking forward to learning more, and I hope you are too. I look forward to seeing you next year when the United States hosts the Clean Energy Ministerial. Thank you.
Going to turn to Rumina Velshi. Rumina was appointed President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in August 2018. Her priorities include safety, innovation, collaboration, trust, and women in STEM. So Rumina, will turn first to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be able to speak briefly on regulating nuclear projects that employ innovative nuclear technologies or apply nuclear technologies in an innovative way. First, I would like to applaud Kirsty, Eric, and the other panelists for their work around flexible nuclear applications, including heating, hydrogen, and repowering coal plants with small modular reactors. This kind of ingenuity serves as a reminder. Regulators must always be ready for whatever comes our way. That's our responsibility and a fundamental element of our commitment to ensuring safety. We need to know and understand what's coming. Safety is our focus at all times, and that will never change. As I have often stated, our role is to protect people from risk, not from progress and innovation. To do that, we must put ourselves in a position of readiness to understand, assess, and analyze the coming transition in the energy sector. That's why we focus so insistently on international collaboration, so we know what our colleagues abroad are doing and seeing, and so we can bring that knowledge and awareness to the Canadian experience. But when it comes to innovation, readiness and collaboration are not enough. Leadership is needed as well. And that's exactly what the CNSC is bringing to an innovation that's already in our midst, small modular reactors or SMRs. Momentum behind SMRs is growing quickly in Canada. We have a pan-Canadian action plan and an agreement among 4 provinces to deploy SMRs. We have government funding and a first license application, which we are presently reviewing. To ensure our readiness and our leadership on this issue, we at the CNSC continue to modernize our regulatory framework. We are offering a pre-licensing design review service, and we have taken steps to ensure that we have the requisite capacity and capability to do our job and do it well. We're also showing leadership internationally by encouraging a greater degree of harmonization of regulatory reviews with nuclear regulators in the United States and the United Kingdom. I was honored to be appointed in February 2020 as chair of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Commission on Safety Standards, or the CSS. My colleagues on the CSS have agreed to prioritize work to establish harmonized international standards for SMRs, standards that are technology neutral, commensurate with the risks presented, and sufficient for the needs of all countries. Harmonizing international standards for SMRs is an important and tangible first step toward greater harmonization across the nuclear regulatory community. They're also an opportunity for regulators to demonstrate to their public their unflinching commitment to safety, whether we're dealing with familiar or innovative technologies. It is my sincere hope that these cooperative efforts will build confidence among policymakers, regulators, and the public, so that one day we can get to a point where the licensing and approval processes can themselves be harmonized. Innovations brings opportunities and potential, but it also brings challenges and the need for constant vigilance. Regulators can take the lead in identifying early problems to address and in encouraging creative solutions. Most regulators want to see smart innovation. They understand that it's in the public interest, but safety assurance is critical. Success will likely be closely linked to the level of trust and confidence earned by regulators and proponents. The public must have confidence that regulators are looking out for their best interests and that proponents are able to carry out their activities safely. Building trust means building relationships, which require sincere, sustained, and dedicated efforts on everyone's part. Innovative ideas like those the panelists here today are presenting encourage and at times force regulators to be ready to respond. Although we in Canada do not have any related applications of repowering coal plants with SMRs at the moment, our readiness work and international leadership on SMRs gives me great confidence that we will be ready to respond in Canada should one arrive. Thank you.
Ramita, thanks so much for those remarks. I think it's terrific to see a safety regulator who's also really building the case and creating the framework under which advanced nuclear innovators can think ahead and bring forward really innovative designs, which can help us put together low carbon, affordable, clean power systems. Next, I'm going to turn to Shannon Bragg-Sitton. Shannon is the lead of the Integrated Energy Systems at the Idaho National Laboratory in the United States. Shannon, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rich. As we globally seek to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions, we will need to use all of our clean energy options that are available in order to meet growing demands for electricity, industrialization, and mobility. As such, the role of nuclear energy in our current and future energy mix is evolving. Our current nuclear plants provide valuable non-emitting electricity, currently as much as 55% of the clean electricity in the US and 10% globally. As more low-emission renewable technologies are being deployed, traditionally baseload nuclear plants are being called upon to operate flexibly, reducing power output when grid net demand is low. While our nuclear plants can certainly provide this operational flexibility, and there is a rich history in countries such as France, Germany, and more recently in the US of doing just that, I contend that we need and can do much more with our clean, reliable, and dispatchable nuclear energy to also make significant advances in the harder to abate sectors such as heavy industry and aviation. Now, when we look to the most prominent efforts to decarbonize, these often begin with a focus on the electricity sector. And they also look to opportunities to electrify transportation and industrial processes. However, not all processes can, nor should they be electrified. The heat demand across all energy sectors far exceeds electricity use. As shown here, in the US, 83% of the ultimate energy use is in the form of heat. That jumps to 88% for the industrial sector. Hence, making significant progress toward emissions reductions must entail increased utilization of non-emitting thermal sources. Now, nuclear plants generate energy without environmental emissions, and the primary output from a nuclear plant is heat. That heat is traditionally converted to electricity to support the grid, but this conversion, while necessary, results in exergy loss. Even a relatively high 40% conversion efficiency from heat to electricity, which can then be sent to electrified processes, still leaves a large amount of energy simply to be rejected. If we instead allow renewables to support grid electricity demand when those resources are available, and then use that heat produced by nuclear plants when we don't need the electricity, we not only enhance the flexibility and economic viability of nuclear plants, but we also make great strides to decarbonizing industry and transportation. In this manner, nuclear energy working flexibly alongside renewables can directly support industrial demand, or it can be used to produce process intermediates such as hydrogen that can supply an array of consumer products. These integrated or hybrid configurations can provide greater operational flexibility as well as system efficiency through flexibly dispatching the generated heat and electricity. And this is often referred to as systems having product flexibility. In 2016, the US DOE National Laboratories partnered to study how we might reduce emissions across the industrial sector by using these non-emitting thermal energy sources, including nuclear, concentrated solar, as well as geothermal. And we evaluated typical processes in each of these target industries. Overall, we found that nuclear technologies, specifically small modular reactors, should be very well matched to the scale of demand of oil refineries, pulp and paper manufacturing, methanol and fertilizer plants, and many others. In some cases, heat recuperation and temperature augmentation may be needed to support thermal energy management in these systems, and we may incorporate thermal energy storage as an intermediate component in order to better match clean energy delivery with the thermal load schedules for coupled processes, particularly when we look to batch plant operations. But overall, we can effectively replace fossil fuel combustion. So I'd like to take a moment to focus on hydrogen, which is part of many energy discussion and many of the analyses that we are conducting today. Hydrogen is a highly versatile energy carrier that can support many downstream applications: electricity production via fuel cells, including for the grid and in fuel cell vehicles, ammonia and fertilizer production, synfuel production, metal refining, and providing feedstock for a range of chemical processes, as you see in this chart here. Currently, hydrogen is mostly produced via steam methane reforming, which also produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct. However, when we generate hydrogen using electrolysis processes, using clean heat and electricity to break down water molecules, that hydrogen can be produced with zero carbon intensity. And markets for this green hydrogen are growing dramatically around the world. But hydrogen is just a starting point. Nuclear energy, when it is deployed with consideration given to operational flexibility and this product flexibility, can and will be a major contributor to our clean energy future. But we don't have to wait for advanced reactors to accomplish this paradigm shift. In the US, 3 of our current fleet nuclear plants are preparing right now to demonstrate this product flexibility, with hardware demonstrations of nuclear hydrogen production beginning this calendar year. These flexibility approaches are also being introduced to our advanced reactor-based plant designs that are expected to be demonstrated and deployed in this decade. As we consider our future energy systems, we need to think more broadly than our current experiences about how each of these resources might support our growing energy demands across all use sectors. And we need to think globally, sharing our knowledge and experiences to accelerate these technologies to market through platforms such as the Nice Future initiative within the Clean Energy Ministerial. Thank you so much for your time today.
Shannon, huge thanks for those remarks, and many thanks for your leadership on this from the very beginning of the Nice Future initiative at SEM. It's incredible to see how you and the IES program have really reconceptualized nuclear's role here, and how the old concept of pure electricity production is really only the beginning of the potential for these technologies. It's just really exciting to see how this has evolved. Next, I'm very happy to move on to Diana Masioka, who's an environmental scientist at the Nuclear Power Energy Agency in Kenya. Diana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paige. I'll go straight to talking about Kenya's clean development strategy, and specifically in terms of energy. Now, Kenya is very specific, and this is something that comes from the presidency, that we are going, as a country, we are following a low carbon development pathway. And this is a message that has been echoed by our president in various global meetings. And it is actually happening at home, that we are actually following a clean development pathway. And this evening, I'll be talking about how this is being done in the energy sector, and what actions are being taken to ensure that we have renewable energy being at the top of our generation in terms of electricity production. And so the country has developed an action plan towards climate change. And there we have various actions in various sectors, all aimed at meeting Kenya's submission in terms of reducing and contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And so one of the priority mitigation activities is increasing our renewables in electricity generation. And so this through this, we've had a lot of renewables being deployed in our grid. And actually right now, around about 70% of our electricity is from geothermal. And we have a good amount from solar and wind. And we have other plants that have been planned for in the future. And so I'd like also to explain how this is done in Kenya. We usually we have the energy sector bringing in professionals from all generators, and also professionals that are involved in planning or deploying a power plant that is affordable and that meets what is the status in our country. So this energy planning encompasses demand forecasting, generation planning, and transmission planning. And this is done every year for the next 20 years. So this report is updated every now and then. And one thing that I'd like to bring about is the issue of nuclear power plant playing a big role in meeting the clean energy system goals of the country, because we have a growing demand, and we also have a target to make sure that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and of course all the other impacts of other power plants that would come on board, like the fossils. So we recently got into a partnership that is very exciting, that is actually helping to solve the challenge of really driving the nuclear message to our partners, to our government, because we really very much would want nuclear to be understood as a clean energy source. And so every time we have discussions with the agencies that are responsible for developing these policies and plans and strategies, we are always required to give facts, to give our argument in terms of practical application. Not just say nuclear is clean, so we want it in the plans. We are required to show, okay, how much of nuclear can come on board compared to how our grid is according to the size. And so we recently got into a partnership with a Nice Future initiative that we hope will be able to give results that we can actually put on the table in our discussions, and we can have nuclear not only in our plans and policies, but we can have nuclear being deployed. And so I'm very excited to be in this engagement, and to really be part of driving nuclear and renewable integration in my country. Thank you.
Diana, thank you so much for those remarks. It's really inspiring to see how Kenya is committed to clean energy as you significantly grow demand and electrification in the country, even while reducing greenhouse gas emissions further. And it's wonderful to hear about the partnership between your government and the Nice Future initiative to really explore how these technologies might be deployed in the growing grid there. Really, really exciting to hear. Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to Stéphane Foutry. He's the Délégué d'État-Major at Tranche et Marche at EDF. Stéphane, to you.
Thank you. I supervise the generation of EDF, so French nuclear fleet of 56 reactors, and I'm in charge of the relationship with the French grid operator. I'm going to talk about the way to reduce carbon footprint of electricity thanks to nuclear, and more specifically to nuclear flexibility. I first wanted to show you what is nuclear flexibility. On this graph, you can see the real output of 1 unit during 1 day. You can see 2 large variations from 100% to 20% of nominal power, each time in half an hour. And you can see also frequency regulation. All that a grid can dream of is on this slide. On the second slide, you have a picture at fleet level of the total output during 1 week. You can notice in yellow that French nuclear fleet generated between 24 to 41 gigawatts during this week, especially during a weekend, depending on wind and solar generation, consumption, and exports. And the last slide is to compare the amount of CO2 per kilowatt hour between countries. France is in green because we emit less CO2 than other countries. Data are from Electricity Map website. It's a very good app, and you can see also other countries worldwide. To take care of the planet, to achieve carbon neutrality, or at least reduce CO2 emissions, the world needs different tools. No tool taken alone is the solution. Nuclear energy is a part of the solutions. It can provide huge quantities of energy, electricity, of course, but also heat. It is a very low carbon source. It is profitable. French electricity prices for customers are under the European average and much lower than in Germany, for instance. And it is flexible. You can reduce the power output when the consumption is low or when renewable generate a lot, as I've shown you on the slides. In this way, nuclear energy is competing against gas and coal, which are the other massive, dispatchable, and flexible sources of electricity. But nuclear does it without CO2. Nuclear energy is a good way for an electricity mix with a large amount of renewable. Other tools are complementary to nuclear flexibility. Storage with batteries or pumping stations, grid interconnections at a continental level, smart grid, power to gas to power systems, cogeneration of heat, and of course, hydrogen. For instance, you can produce hydrogen when renewables are generating a lot. Instead of reducing the power output of a nuclear plant, you can use electricity surplus at a very low cost to produce hydrogen by electrolysis without CO2. Nuclear energy can work as a storage device. Once the core has been refueled, you have a certain quantity of energy for 1 year or more. It looks like the water in a dam. You can decide when you want to use it. More during winter and less during summer in France, for instance, or more during summer in countries with a lot of air conditioners, for another instance. Amongst all those solutions, nuclear flexibility is very cost effective. Compared to a base load nuclear plant, you do not need a lot of additional investment. Enhanced grid regulation, batteries or grid interconnections, and so on, need some research, some development, and investment in new infrastructure. What is true for flexibility is also true for frequency or voltage regulation that a transportation grid needs to operate over time. France has proven since the 1980s that nuclear power plants can be operated in flexible mode, in a safely manner, and in a cost-effective way. Our forecast by 2030 or 2040 shows that nuclear flexibility will be very useful to go with the development of more and more renewable energies. Batteries, hydrogen, and other solutions will make it even easier. Thank you for your attention.
Stefan, very exciting presentation. It really shatters some preconceptions that nuclear is purely a baseload resource, with nuclear for you providing both significant flexibility and other important grid services in France, like frequency regulation, even just in the present, much less all of the future possibilities you shared. Clearly the carbon intensity of France's grid is really enviable for many of us around the world. And I think we all have so much to learn from how EDF has relied on this technology and all of the ways that you have found to use it to support a clean and reliable and very affordable grid in France. So thank you again for those remarks. Next, I'm very excited to turn to an exchange between Stefan Kvist and Zbigniew Kubacki on the potential for new nuclear in Eastern Europe, particularly as part of a coal to nuclear transition. Stefan is an engineer and consultant to clean energy projects around the world, and Zbigniew is the advisor to the minister at the Ministry of Climate in Poland. Now turning over to both of you.
Thank you. In Poland, still around 70% of the electricity is generated from coal, so it is completely unsustainable, and our government is trying now to transform the energy sector very rapidly to fulfill its obligations coming from the European Union policy and international obligations. Poland approved last year new energy policy, and this energy policy is composed of 3 pillars. One pillar is a just transition, so it means nobody will be left during this transition. Second pillar is zero emission energy system. So we are committed to the net zero system by around the year of 2050. And then finally improve the air quality in Poland. Pillar 1, just transition. This is very important part of it, because we want to have the reduction in energy poverty in Poland. We want to take care of the customers, and then introduce the new industry in the Polish energy system, and the new industry are renewable sector and nuclear energy sector. So we want to have 300,000 people employed additionally in the clean energy sectors. The zero emission system will be composed of 3 parts. We want to build very rapidly offshore wind on the Baltic Sea. We want to build, around 6 to 9 gigawatts of nuclear. And final part of the zero system will be distributed in prosumer sector. We want to have a very large sector, and the people will be possible to produce clean electricity for their needs. This new Polish nuclear power program has following assumption. First, we want to have first large power station in 2033, and then every 2 years from that date, there will be new unit built in Poland. So together will be 6 units, up to 9 gigawatts of the electricity potential. We want to adjust the legal conditions, propose new business and financial model, operation model for nuclear power plants. We want to have active role of the state. We want to improve, empower the Polish regulators. And finally, is the role of small modular technology in Poland with the perspective of 2040. The Polish nuclear power program has the rationale, which is almost the same in any country deploying nuclear power. It's energy security, protection of environment, and economic benefits. The Polish nuclear power program is very important from the perspective of climate. We want to be following ambitious climate policy. Generally, the nuclear will bring for Poland a lot of the benefits, like the zero emission, the lowest use of land, the possibility of cogeneration in Poland, producing the heat for districts and industrial purposes, the lowest concrete per unit of energy generation, possibility of future recycling of nuclear spent fuels, and saving of valuable materials like rare earth elements. In general terms, climate policy will be benefiting from the Polish nuclear power from our perspective, because electricity production from the nuclear power plants in this current version will be around 70 terawatts per year. We want to save through that way around 50 million tons of CO2. It looks like that we will be able to cut the emission by 30%. You can see this situation on this graph, the steep decrease of the emissions and the fulfillment of the climate obligation and objectives by Poland through the introduction of nuclear power. This is a big opportunity for countries like Poland. Although we are now thinking as a government on the large scale reactors, we are fully aware of the potential of SMRs, especially HTGRs. We are starting very large scientific projects on HTGR, which we are targeting mostly for industrial cogenerations. Having zero emission sources will save us large amounts of the capital. And then there is a synergy between large and small program. Concluding my remarks, like to give the floor to Stefan, because we cooperate with him for some time. He prepared 2 excellent studies. The retrofitting potential of coal power station is a viable option on Poland. I'd like to thank you, and now I ask Stefan for presenting his very interesting studies and analysis of the Polish retrofitting options. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kubacki. I will give a quick introduction to the idea that we call coal power retrofit decarbonization, or coal repowering, which is basically something we hope is a useful pathway of ideas or family ideas for countries such as Poland that have built up a large coal power fleet and is now, due to climate and environmental issues, needing to retire that fleet. And the premise of the idea is whether we could reuse some of that infrastructure going forward, whether it has a role to play in the future or not. Coal power is quite well known as being the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions globally, and also the largest source of electricity currently. Locally, it's even worse than that, let's say, on a local basis. So as we heard, 70% of Polish electricity, same fraction in India, little bit less in China, but these are very, very large places. So a lot of plants, up to 85, even 90, 95% of electricity in some countries. All of these plants will need to either somehow stop emitting CO2 or retire in the very near future. And there have been large investments into these plants, and many people work at these plants. And that is a problem both from an economic standpoint and a just transition standpoint. And that's kind of what we were trying to address in this research program. So the coal power plant fleet today, it's around roughly 2,000 gigawatts worth of capacity, most of which are young in terms of infrastructure. Half of that capacity is less than 14 years old. The capacity weighted age of the coal power plant fleet is about 17 or 18 years old or so. And they can run for many, many decades, technically. Every time we add a new gigawatt of a coal plant capacity, we add or commit to in and around 200 million tons of additional CO2 emissions. So the idea is, can we avoid stranding all these investments that we've made, avoid firing the local workforce, and actually use that site and the equipment without continuing to burn fossil fuels, or at least without emitting CO2 in the future. So this is just a graph of the coal power plant capacity we've been adding as we have been talking about doing climate strategy and climate mitigation efforts. We've been adding enormous amounts of new coal power plant capacity globally, over 100 gigawatts per year, certain years. And this is fresh, new infrastructure that can run for many, many decades, maybe 50, 60 years if well maintained. So what can we do with these plants? Could we stop burning coal in these plants and replace that heat source with something else? Or additionally, maybe we could replace the coal with biomass, or maybe we could put post-combustion carbon capture on these plants. We looked at all of them, and that study concluded that the most elegant and probably most effective way would be to replace the heat source itself, the coal boilers, with a zero carbon heat source. And the most obvious technical fit for that would be a high temperature nuclear reactor or a high temperature geothermal heat source. So that's what we looked at in detail with many, many excellent Polish partners, Polish researchers at Polish universities, and currently also with Polish utilities and Polish industrial companies. So what we came to on a global scale is most likely the repowering idea, retrofit decarbonization idea will go in one or two, or ideally both pathways of nuclear and high temperature geothermal repowering, where we reuse as much of those sites as we possibly can, retain those assets, retain the workforce, and avoid the committed emissions from those assets. No one wants to shut off a brand new coal power plant that you've just bought and paid for extremely prematurely. If you can retain that asset in a productive way while eliminating the CO2 emissions, it's a quite elegant idea in principle. We try to figure out whether it's practical by doing a case study in Poland, specifically for Poland with excellent Polish researchers involved. We made a study to categorize and characterize all of the Polish coal units in terms of their age, steam conditions, their site sizes, and what kind of retrofit would be suitable. And we came to the general conclusion that about half of the Polish coal-powered fleet could be retrofit decarbonized, most of that using nuclear. And that would provide kind of the bedrock for a future clean energy system in Poland, where you'd likely have a cost-optimal mix of new renewables and a firm, reliable power source that could actually be the large fleet that Mr. Kubacki was mentioning, which would be a greenfield fleet, backed up by a repowered fleet of SMRs. And so we made a really detailed study about this, including the sites, which I can't go into, but it's freely available for anyone to download, a couple of papers on that. We are continuing this work with very detailed case studies in Poland, alongside Polish utilities and Polish industrial companies, and with Mr. Kubacki's ministry involved. We want to start introducing thermal energy storage as the interface between nuclear reactors and existing coal plant steam cycles. We are doing the same in China with a large group of very active and excellent Chinese partners. And we are also trying to figure out whether we could actually repower coal plants that run at very high steam temperatures to run at lower steam temperatures, lower steam parameters, maybe just the lower pressure, lower temperature part of those steam turbines, so we could repower them with existing more conventional geothermal or existing light water reactor technology. So that's as quick as I can do an intro about this idea. I have a few pictures, which I promised to show. So this is a view of what the equipment of a coal power plant might look like today. And what we want to do is retain as much of this as possible, as much of the value of this as possible, as much of the people that work there as possible, while eliminating emissions. So we will, in most cases, decommission the coal and ash handling facilities and the boiler units marked in this picture. Establish on-site a construction site for a low carbon replacement, in this case, SMR, high temperature small modular reactors. And then put them into operation. So we've retained most of the equipment on site in terms of scale. In comparison to a greenfield project of the same type, we probably saved about 1/3 of the cost, probably saved some time as well. That's what our analysis showed. And most of the bulk of the workforce, the local workforce, could be retained in this kind of transition. So we kind of want to put this type of idea out there. We want to study it more in Poland, detailed with Mr. Kubacki and his team, and kind of hope that it spreads all across the world. And anyone who's interested, please reach out. Thank you.
Huge thanks, Zbigniew and Stefan. In some sense, this question of how to repurpose the infrastructure and the energy communities and the workforces and the value chains as some of the world's coal fleet retires in the coming decades is, perhaps the most enormous and poorly addressed question in the global energy system. So it's just terrific, Stefan, that you're starting to put some serious analysis into that question. And it does seem like Poland perhaps could establish a model for the world in this, ideally that China and many other countries can follow. So very, very exciting to hear. Now to take us even deeper into that topic, we're going to turn to Eric Ingersoll, who's a co-founder of TerraPraxis and is also very deeply looking at this opportunity of coal to nuclear transitions. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Rich. And special thanks to Stefan for an amazing presentation about repowering coal plants. I'm going to talk about that as well, but from a different angle. As we know, coal emissions are a very significant part of power sector emissions. And just the locked-in coal plants, the coal plants that have been built recently, could exceed the power sector carbon budget by a large margin. As Stefan pointed out, half the global coal fleet is less than 20 years old. And from a financial perspective, what that means is that more than $1 trillion of invested capital in those plants has yet to be recovered. This means it's very unrealistic to assume that these assets will just be abandoned early on in their useful lives. Furthermore, there's significant amounts of jobs and the benefit of electricity generation, tax revenue, and the reliability role that these plants play on the grid. So these are all benefits that these plants produce today that make it very difficult to shut them down prematurely. But what if we could unlock the global coal fleet in order to meet net zero? The chart here shows a repowering scenario where the coal plants are repowered with advanced heat sources or advanced reactors. We continue to generate power from these plants, but we no longer have emissions. This is what might be possible. Repowering separates the benefits of coal fleets from what we don't want, which is the emissions. But to do this in the timescale that we're talking about here would require very high volume delivery models for the projects. And these would have to be applicable to a very large variety of plant and site conditions. Obviously, they would have to be very low cost, and they would have to be attractive investments for the owners or operators of these plants. So how can we achieve this kind of rapid and cost competitive coal plant repowering? We know from analyzing the projected costs of advanced nuclear plants that if you can reduce the scope of a project substantially by reusing many parts of the existing power plant, such as the turbine, the grid connection, the switch yard, the cooling system, etc., This can result in a substantial reduction in cost. And then if those remaining systems and buildings that need to be delivered can be delivered in a standardized and optimized way, we believe it will be possible to have the new plant operate at a lower cost of energy than when it was a coal plant. So the same generation, none of the emissions. But to do this, we need to apply leading design, manufacturing, and assembly best practices. What does that mean for this kind of system? We're designing for rapid, large-scale coal fleet repowering. So we want to focus on repowering whole fleets at a time, not single plants at a time. So we already talked about de-scoping the project by reusing the majority of the existing plant. We're looking at highly automated and very fast design processes. So having algorithms design the building that the advanced reactor would go in, and to have it design that building out of components that are already designed for high volume manufacturing and rapid assembly on site. These buildings would be designed to be flexible in their design to accommodate a range of different advanced reactors that are coming to market in the 2020s. So one sort of design system would enable multiple different reactors at a whole range of coal plants. The threshold here is to make this a low-cost, attractive investment for plant owners. In other words, not something that just saves their asset from being written off, but something that's an attractive investment for the new capital coming in to fund the project. We're also working on a fast licensing pathway. As we move to more standardized designs and reuse of standardized reactor systems, the number of things that are different between each project starts to become very small, and the system can be designed to make it easy for the regulators to review and approve. And all of this would be based on a high quality, high volume manufacturing supply chain for all the components that would be able to be blended to integrate local suppliers when those are available. So we've recruited a team that's helping us transform this problem into an opportunity. And we have a $1.4 million project underway with a global team of experts, including Bryden Wood, who are experts in algorithmic design, MIT for thermal engineering, Nuvia for nuclear systems, University of Buffalo for civil engineering and seismic strategies. And Southern Company is our first utility partner, but we expect to have multiple utility partners who are the intended users of this system. This breaks the deadlock keeping the coal fleet in place. And that's energy versus emissions. The energy is valuable, the energy is needed. Many of the countries that have recently built coal plants are beginning to start economic development on the backs of those assets. This decoupling of the energy from the emissions allows us to maintain and enhance a whole range of benefits listed here without contributing to climate change. We have a 3-year plan. Our first year's goal is to create a screening tool that will be available as a hosted web-based application to allow coal plant owners to screen their plants and their fleets to do kind of high-level feasibility analysis for repowering projects. That tool will be available by November, and we hope to have every coal plant owner in the world use that within the next year or so. The next phase of the project is delivering a conceptual design tool. So this is a tool that will actually cost out and do preliminary design on a whole range of the parts of your repowering project and allow you to get relatively accurate schedule and budgetary information. This is designed to enable the real project development process to get underway. And finally, at the end of 2023, we expect to be delivering a detailed design tool that can actually be used to finalize licensing, get building permits, contract with vendors, and manage the procurement and project execution of the repowering process. So now we have a video from our design partner, Bryden Wood, showing how their approach to algorithmic design can be used for the process of repowering fleets of coal plants.
Coal-fired power stations come in a wide variety of types, in a wide variety of sites and locations. We had to find a way to address this for the entire fleet if we are to achieve our timeline for repowering coal. We at TerraPraxis are working with Bryden Wood, who are experts in digital approaches to feasibility surveying, design and construction in multiple sectors. Remember, we are focusing on the small part of each facility, the heat source that we will be replacing. The principle is the same for every facility. Our solution is automated feasibility surveying and standardized facility design. It has been tried and tested, notably in the data center sector. In data centers, the process has reduced the time taken to produce a viable master plan from about 10 months to 6 hours, increased facility performance by 40% per meter squared, and reduced capital building cost by up to 40%. Bryden Wood specialize in developing automated design tools for complex facilities on multiple sites. Our automated solution is built around clear rules for the optimal design for these facilities, which we then apply to specific sites. We start by defining our site. We apply specific rules for the client, facility type, or location. We fine-tune the metrics for the particular project. We iterate and test multiple permutations until we find the optimal solution for the site. Then we move the design process and generate working building information models as a basis for procurement and construction. Remember that we are not building power stations. We are replacing one part of the facility with a clean heat source. This means minimal disruption to generation, minimum disruption to the facility and the community, maximum reuse of existing structures. The facility, with its infrastructure including transmission, remains viable and profitable, retaining and sustaining high-quality jobs, dramatically lowering costs and business risk. A faster path to net zero, enabling the clean energy transition.
Huge thanks for that presentation, Eric, and particularly exciting to see that you're developing not just this concept, but an actual tool that global coal plant operators will be able to use to assess the viability in their own operations. And very exciting to see what Bryden Woods could bring to this, and particularly on the design end of this. Now we're going to bring the conversation back to Rumina Velshi, the president of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, in conversation with the great Kirsty Gogan, co-founder of TerraPraxis, to explore this concept a little bit more from a regulatory perspective.
President Velshi, you're aware about our proposal about repurposing coal plants with advanced nuclear in support of the clean energy transition. And other panelists are focused on the integration of advanced nuclear with renewables and other innovative ideas. What do you think of these approaches as Canada's nuclear regulator?
So personally, I applaud you for these innovative ideas. I believe there is an imperative and urgency to consider all possible technologies and applications to help in the fight against climate change. Professionally, of course, as I'm sure you'd understand, the question is not within my mandate as the head of an independent nuclear regulatory agency. Our mandate is safety, and that is what we remind the public, the host and potential host communities, and all our stakeholders at every opportunity that we have. However, as regulators, we need to be aware of where the headwinds are blowing, so that we're able to be prepared and to respond in a timely manner. To that end, we need to ensure we can be ready to review and, if safe, regulate projects that propose to use advanced nuclear technologies. So in the particular application that you have proposed, so long as the proponent can demonstrate to our satisfaction the safety case, which assesses the facility to modern codes and standards, not only for the nuclear island, but for the entire facility and the site, we have no interest or mandate to impede the adoption of the technology. As I said, I applaud it personally, and if we were to receive such an application, we have the wherewithal to actually review it and see if it meets our requirement. The hard work around kind of the sales pitch is up to the proponents and the government, and fortunately not the regulator.
That's fantastic. And if I may ask a second question, what are some of the things that you're looking for from proponents when it comes to innovation? What can they do to help their chances of success?
I think there are two things that I believe are essential. The first is involving the regulator early, and the second is building community trust and acceptance. Proponents of innovative solutions and technologies need to include the regulators at the outset so that we can ensure we have the requisite knowledge and expertise. But it's also to the proponents' advantage in engaging us early, because that would help mitigate the regulatory risks by knowing if there are any showstoppers in their proposal. But also it would help minimize the length of licensing. And we know that licensing tends to be part of the critical path of the deployment of any new technologies. So early engagement of the regulators is to everyone's advantage. Equally important is the imperative to build community trust and local acceptance. Proponents should be prepared to invest significantly in building trust and acceptance, just as they have in preparing safety cases for the regulator. And this means spending time in communities to get to know them and to be known by communities to help establish a basis of mutual understanding. And to be successful, that work must begin very early in the process, well before a license application is submitted.
Huge thanks, Romina and Kirsty. Again, very exciting to hear that global nuclear regulators are already getting ahead of these vital discussions around innovative coal to nuclear transitions. Next, we're going to turn to Lauren Latham. She's the principal research engineer at Southern Company. Southern has been a real leader in investing in advanced nuclear in the United States, and Lauren is going to supply the first of our two utility perspectives on this concept. Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Rich, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak among really leaders in this space and on a topic that I'm truly passionate about and lucky enough to be able to work on in my day-to-day job, as a principal engineer at Southern Company. So just for a little bit of background, Southern Company is one of the largest energy providers in the United States. And like many of our peers, we've set a greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal of net zero operations by 2050. And one of the things that is really going to help us achieve that goal is the fact that we maintain an active and a really robust research and development program, because it's extremely important to us that we develop, demonstrate, and deploy solutions that truly benefit our customers' evolving energy needs. So we in R&D spend a lot of time and a lot of effort identifying technology solutions today that will positively impact tomorrow to provide clean, safe, reliable, and affordable energy to our customers. But we don't just identify those solutions. We also believe it's really essential that we define our end user requirements early to really enable effective development and demonstration programs. So beyond reducing emissions, what are those end user requirements that we should be setting for those programs? And a number of the speakers in this session have highlighted some of them. I just wanted to come back to two of them that I think we really should focus on a lot. The first is operational flexibility. What we need to be able to do is supply 100% of our customers' power needs when they need it and where they need it. And growing reliance on electrification as a decarbonization pathway, even for other sectors, means we need a resilient and a reliable grid built on the back of sustainable and repeatable generation that's available when our customers need it. And the second thing I wanted to highlight was application or product flexibility. I think a lot of us get too caught up thinking about decarbonization just of the power sector sometimes, especially in my line of business. But really what we're talking about is a conversation around decarbonizing an entire economy. So many of our customers not only need clean electricity, but they also need clean heat, clean feedstocks, and clean fuels in addition to that clean electricity. And advanced nuclear technology, I think, will play a really unique and a critical role in the future as a technology that can affordably provide this type of operational and application flexibility. So Southern Company collaborates really closely with an advanced reactor developer called TerraPower on the development of their molten chloride fast reactor. And we see that as a long-term energy solution. That machine itself can load follow and therefore integrate really well with a high penetration of renewables, but it can also support around-the-clock electricity, heat, and efficient hydrogen production needs of, say, some of our industrial customers. We expect this reactor will economically scale across a really wide range of capacities, and that'll position it really well for helping decarbonize hard-to-decarbonize sectors like long-haul shipping. As we transition our fleet, transition the energy system to incorporate more of these technologies like advanced nuclear, we must do so in a just and a constructive way. There's strategies to leverage our skilled workforce, to leverage our existing infrastructure like repower and coal plants, like we've talked about today. Those strategies must be prioritized. I really think that decarbonizing the economy is likely the greatest opportunity of this generation, and delivering technologies that eliminate those emissions but continue to bring increased value to our customers, like advanced nuclear, is the most important thing we could be doing right now. Thanks for the time today.
Huge thanks, Lauren, as always. Southern's R&D program on this is really, I think, at the cutting edge in the United States, and I think fair to say globally. And congratulations again on bringing one of your concepts forward through the U.S. Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. Really terrific to see you all moving forward with the McCree design and concept. So thanks for that. Next, we'll move to Carol Gregory's. A little further north in North America. She's the project director at the Darlington New Nuclear Project, a key part of Ontario power generation, for the next of our utility perspectives on these opportunities.
Hello, my name is Carol Gregoris, and I'm a project director at Ontario Power Generation in Canada. I've worked in the nuclear industry in Canada for over 30 years, and before that, my father also had his career in the nuclear industry. I grew up in a small town in Ontario that was home to Atomic Energy of Canada Limited and Ontario Hydro, now Ontario Power Generation, both government-owned corporations who pioneered nuclear power in Canada. I am now very privileged to be part of this next generation of development of nuclear power, with Ontario Power Generation taking a leading role to advance small modular reactors. Ontario Power Generation is the largest electricity producer in Ontario, with a fleet of nuclear units and hydro plants, a biomass station, a solar plant, and a number of natural gas plants. At one time, we also had coal-fired plants, but in the early 2000s, the Ontario government announced closure of all its coal-fired plants, and the final unit was shut down in 2014. Last month, we watched as governments around the world, including Canada, recommitted to carbon reduction targets for 2030. More than ever before, we can see on our horizon the phase out of coal across the country. We can also expect carbon prices to increase, making clean energy sources more competitive. Today, more than 30% of Ontario's carbon emissions come from transportation. A move to power cars, trucks, trains, buses, and even boats with electricity rather than gas or diesel will make a significant impact. Electrification is coming, and solar and wind aren't alone going to fill the gap. We see our project to build a first-of-a-kind small modular reactor as part of this carbon-free electrification future for Ontario and Canada. Our goal is not just to build the first SMR in Ontario by the end of the decade, but to build reactors across the country to replace retiring carbon-emitting generation. To date, the leaders of 4 provinces in Canada have signed on to a memorandum of understanding to advance the development of small modular reactors. Nuclear power plants have traditionally been used as baseload generation, with other generators providing the flexibility to the grid. That has been the most cost-effective way to run most nuclear plants, given their relatively high fixed cost compared to other sources. In addition, most reactor designs are meant to operate at a steady power. That being said, the newer designs of nuclear plants can provide more load following capability than the older designs. And some designs have high temperature loops capable of energy storage and other applications. These additional features may have significant benefits in the future. Ontario Power Generation is looking at these different designs, and we're also looking closely at energy storage and the potential for hydrogen production technologies. I hope this brief overview has provided some perspective why Ontario Power Generation is pursuing SMRs as one of the pillars of our climate change plan and our energy future. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Great. Thanks so much, Carol. Terrific to see Ontario's continuing commitment to nuclear and to new and advanced nuclear as well. I think North America has a bright future in deploying these technologies and finding a path forward for flexible nuclear. Next, we're going to turn to Jessica Lovering. She's the co-founder of the Good Energy Collective for an advocate and analyst perspective in the United States. Jessica, over to you.
Great, thank you, Rich. So we've already heard a lot today about the promising potential for advanced nuclear technologies in terms of providing flexible generation, partnering with renewable energy, and repowering coal power plants, which is very exciting. But what I'm going to talk about now is how we actually build those new nuclear power plants in a just and equitable way. So first of all, the market for new nuclear is huge. I helped with a project to map the global market for advanced nuclear with 2 US think tanks, Third Way and Energy for Growth Hub. And what we did is we calculated the future market size by first estimating demand for electricity out to 2050 based on projections of GDP growth, and then combine that with an evaluation of when each country, all countries around the world, would be ready to host a commercial nuclear power plant. And what we found is that there are potential markets for advanced nuclear in all regions and all income groups. But what's most interesting is that over 85% of new global electricity demand in 2050 is going to come from countries that already have nuclear power plants or will be ready to host one by 2030. So even if these countries just get a small share of their future electricity from nuclear, that could triple the global market by 2050. But this opportunity also raises a lot of questions for how these new advanced nuclear technologies will be deployed. There's questions regarding safety regulation, security and nonproliferation, financing, fuel supply, and of course, waste disposal. But perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that these export projects on the whole are fair and just for emerging nuclear countries? So for starters, governments in vendor countries need to start preparing now for the export of advanced reactors as a form of international development and foreign aid, while recognizing the diverse energy needs of these emerging economies. We should develop meaningful RD&D partnerships that advance the best practices, not just in technology, but also in economics, public policy, social sciences with these allied countries. More concisely, nuclear vendors need to take environmental justice seriously, both for their export projects and for domestic nuclear projects. Here in the US, the Biden administration has put a strong emphasis on environmental justice in their agenda to mitigate climate change. But what does that mean for nuclear energy? We're still figuring that out. So according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. To put that more colloquially, environmental justice is a movement that focuses on the fair distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. Unfortunately, nuclear energy has a long history of environmental injustice, with environmental burdens going disproportionately to disadvantaged and vulnerable communities, while the carbon-free electricity and the high-paying jobs tend to go more towards privileged countries or communities. So going forward, our governments and industry will need to focus their efforts on both expanding equitable access to the opportunities that nuclear can provide, while also ensuring a fair, just, and equitable process for citing the burdens such as mining, fuel processing, and waste. We really need to start these conversations now around things like sustainable mining, community-centered siting processes, and workforce development. So that's the work that I'll be doing in the next few years, and I hope you'll join me. Thank you.
Huge thanks, Jessica. Clearly a vast global opportunity for new clean energy from nuclear, if handled correctly, as you say, very, very importantly. Just that core number, potential for tripling the global market for this technology by 2050, even just keeping a modest share of the growth in energy demand from the countries that are already very open or deploying nuclear is a pretty remarkable opportunity to think about in the next couple of decades. So thanks for everything that you've done there. Now, last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Isabel Bamaki. Isabel is a model and nuclear influencer, and you might know her by her amazing social channels at Isodope. I think it's fair to say she's the world's most psychedelic nuclear influencer, and we're really excited to hear from her on how to bring along audiences to more interest in these technologies. Isabel, over to you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. It's super exciting to hear about all the innovations happening in nuclear energy. I just wanted to remind everyone of the need to act now. Climate change seems to be what everyone is talking about, so it might look like the battle has been won. But in reality, it's just the beginning. We know what needs to be done to prevent the worst effects of climate change from happening. We have to electrify and then decarbonize. But even though it's pretty straightforward, getting there is a very challenging issue. In reality, we only have a couple of decades to change the way we do everything and replace fossil fuels. There is no time to waste, and we must act now. Together, we can dream of a future in which everyone, no matter where they're born, has access to clean, reliable, and abundant energy that's less damaging to the environment. But in order to achieve that, we have to drop our biases and take a fresh look at the climate crisis through a clear and pragmatic lens, ensuring that all options available at this time are being considered. Oh, and one more thing. We have to save all existing nuclear power plants. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Great, thanks so much, Isabel. Terrific to have you. Terrific to have all of our speakers and policymakers and utility representatives and thought leaders and analysts here joining us on this really interesting, complex set of interconnected topics. I think we heard today that nuclear can play an ever greater role as part of a flexible, integrated clean energy system, whether that's fitting nicely right alongside renewables, operating in a more flexible way in the power sector, or increasingly becoming part of integrated energy systems where nuclear, in addition to just supplying power, is also creating hydrogen and other low carbon materials, playing a huge role in decarbonizing the global fuel system. Just really exciting opportunities and flexibility. And clearly we heard that there's a massive opportunity in taking the huge value chain and workforces and investments and interconnections with grids around the world in the existing coal fleet. And as that fleet prepares to retire or soon looks at potentially early retirement for portions of that coal fleet around the world, how advanced nuclear technologies at global scale could really play an enormous opportunity in helping facilitate all of the investments and all of the assets and all the workforces in that fleet into a cleaner energy future. So I think we've had a terrific conversation today. I remain very excited about the prospects for advanced nuclear and very excited to be part of the Nice Future initiative and flexible nuclear campaign that's really delving deeply into these topics. Thanks again for attending SEM 12. Thanks again for watching this session. And we hope to see more of you soon in the years to come.